The rain came down in sheets, turning the mansion's grand courtyard into a muddy battlefield. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the iron gates and the twisted faces of the servants who had gathered like a pack of hyenas. Their voices were sharp, cruel, and united in their hatred of the woman who stood at the center of the storm. Makena's suitcase lay in the mud, its contents scattered photographs of her family, a worn-out scarf that had once belonged to her mother, and the shattered pieces of a small wooden box that held her most precious possession. She stood tall despite the humiliation, her back straight, her eyes dry even as the rain plastered her hair to her face. The servants circled her, shouting accusations that she was a thief, a liar, a foreigner who had wormed her way into the master's house only to steal his jewels. The head housekeeper, Misuk, stepped forward with a venomous smile. She held up a brooch the master's brooch and declared that it had been found in Makena's room. Makena shook her head, her voice steady but laced with quiet fury. She had taken nothing. She had never taken what wasn't hers. But Misuk was not interested in the truth. She wanted blood, and she had the mob behind her. You think because the young master tolerates you, you're above us? Misuk sneered. You are nothing. Just a hired hand from a country of beggars. The servants laughed. Someone shoved Makena from behind, and she stumbled forward, her pride the only thing that kept her from falling to her knees. A guard grabbed her arm, and another seized the other, preparing to drag her from the property. Makena did not fight. She had long ago learned that fighting only made the cruelty worse. Instead, she lifted her chin and searched the crowd for the one face that mattered. And there he was. Little Seo Jin, the 6-year-old son of the most feared man in the Korean underworld, stood at the top of the grand staircase. His tiny hands gripped the stuffed tiger she had given him, the one that had once belonged to his dead mother, and his face was crumpled with a grief far too large for a child his age. He had heard everything. He had seen everything. And now, as the guards started to drag Makena toward the door, he broke. He ran down the marble stairs, his small feet slipping on the polished stone. He shoved past the servants, ducked under an outstretched arm, and threw himself at Makena's legs, wrapping his arms around her with all the strength his little body could muster. I won't let them take you, he screamed, his voice cracking with sobs. I won't. Makena's composure finally shattered. She dropped to her knees and pulled him into her arms, holding him as the rain seeped through the doorway and soaked them both. The servants stood frozen, uncertain. Misuk's face twisted with fury, but she dared not touch the young master. Then Seo Jin looked up at Makena, his tear-streaked face contorted with desperation, and he spoke the words that would change everything. Please don't leave me, Mom. The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Every servant, every relative, every guard froze in place. Misuk's face drained of all color. The relatives who had mocked Makena earlier stared with their mouths agape. Even the rain seemed to pause, as if the heavens themselves were waiting for what would come next. And then the massive front door swung open. Han Tae-sung, the Mafia boss who ruled the underworld with an iron fist, stood in the doorway. His eyes swept across the scene, his son clinging to the African nanny, the mob of servants and relatives, the shattered belongings scattered in the mud, and the triumphant smirk that had just faded from Misuk's face. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His presence alone commanded absolute silence. Explain, he said, now. That was the moment everything changed. But to understand how they had arrived at that precipice, one had to go back to the beginning, when Makena was just another desperate soul seeking a chance to rebuild her shattered life. 3 years earlier, in the sun-baked streets of Nairobi, Makena had been immersed beloved by her community. She worked at a small clinic that served the poorest families, healing children with fevers, comforting mothers who had lost their babies, and offering hope to those who had none. But when international donors pulled their funding, the clinic was forced to close. Makena had borrowed money from unscrupulous lenders to keep it afloat, but when she could not repay them, she found herself drowning in debt. The lenders offered her a way out, a dangerous, degrading way, but Makena had refused. She would not sell her dignity, not even for the clinic she loved. Desperate, she had signed up with an overseas recruitment agency. Korea was far away, and the job was for a household staff position in a wealthy family. The recruiter had warned her that the master was a dangerous man, and that his son had driven away every previous nanny within a week. But Makena did not care about danger. She cared about the money she needed to send back home to reopen the clinic. She cared about the children who were still sick and waiting. So she had boarded a plane and flown halfway across the world, arriving at the palatial mansion with nothing but a suitcase and a heart full of hope. From her first day, the household staff had made their contempt clear. Misuk, the head housekeeper, had sneered at her dark skin and called her a witch in Korean, assuming Makena could not understand. The other servants whispered about her kind and speculated about her motives. But Makena had endured worse. She had grown up in a world where people judged her by the color of her skin, and she had learned to meet every insult with the quiet dignity of a woman who knew her own worth. The child, Seojin, was the greatest challenge. He was a hollow shell of a boy, haunted by the death of his mother 2 years earlier. He had not smiled since the funeral. He had not accepted any of the nannies who had come before Makena, throwing tantrums and breaking toys and screaming until they fled. When Makena first approached him, he had hurled a wooden block at her chest and shouted for her to go away. But Makena had not gone away. She had knelt down to his level, ignoring the servant's mockery, and pointed to the stuffed tiger he clutched. She told him that her own mother had given her a tiger when she was little, and she had hugged it every night after her mother left. She told him that she understood what it felt like to be alone. Something shifted in the boy's eyes. He did not hug her, did not speak to her, but he did not run away. That was the first crack in his armor. Over the following days and weeks, Makena proved her patience. She sat with him during his nightmares, singing the African lullaby her grandmother had taught her. She chased him through the garden, laughing when he tripped and fell. She taught him the names of flowers and told him that even on cloudy days, the sunflowers knew where the light was. Slowly, painfully, Seojin began to thaw. He started eating again. He started sleeping through the night. And one afternoon, when Makena was reading him a story, he crawled into her lap and rested his head against her chest, and she felt his tiny heart beating in sync with her own. The servants were jealous. Mi-suk, in particular, seethed with resentment. She had served the Han family for decades, and she had never been able to make the young master smile. Now this foreign woman had achieved the impossible in just a few short months. Worse, Mi-suk noticed that the master, Han Tae-sung, was watching Makena with an intensity that bordered on obsession. He had not looked at any woman since his wife's death, but now his gaze followed Makena wherever she went. Tae-sung was a man carved from ice. He had built his empire through ruthlessness and blood, and he had never allowed himself to feel anything beyond cold calculation. But when he saw his son laughing, truly laughing for the first time in 2 years, something shifted inside him. He started making excuses to be near Makena, watching her from doorways, listening to her sing, absorbing the warmth she radiated. He had tried to keep his distance, but his heart had other plans. One night, when Seojin had a nightmare and Makena went to comfort him, Tae-sung found her asleep in the chair beside his son's bed, her hands still resting on the boy's. He had covered her with a blanket, and for a long moment, he had simply stood there looking at her. He had not touched her, but he had wanted to. He had wanted to more than he had wanted anything in years. Mi-suk saw this, and her jealousy curdled into something darker. She began scheming to destroy Makena. She intercepted a letter from Makena's former employer and Kenu, a glowing recommendation that praised Makena's honesty and dedication, and forged a new document accusing Makena of theft. She planted the master's brooch in Makena's room, and then orchestrated a public confrontation, hoping to humiliate Makena so thoroughly that she would be banished forever. But Mi-suk had underestimated Han Tae-sung. He was not a man who accepted things at face value. He had investigated Makena from the very first day she arrived, and he knew the truth of her past. He knew about the clinic in Nairobi, the debt, the heartbreak she had endured. He also knew something else, something that would change everything. When Makena's belongings were thrown outside and the shattering box revealed a silver wedding ring, Tae-sung's eyes had narrowed. He had seen that ring before. It was his wife's. And the photo that fell from Makena's wallet, the one with a Korean woman, was a face he knew intimately. It was Yuna, his late wife, hugging Makena on a beach, their arms wrapped around each other like sisters. The truth was devastating and beautiful. Yuna had never told Tae-sung about her African friend, but she had spoken of her often, of the woman who had taught her how to laugh again, how to trust, how to love without fear. She had called Makena her other heart. And now, by some twist of fate, that same woman had come to care for Yune's son, to heal the wounds that had festered since his mother's death. After the public humiliation, after the servants had been dismissed and Mi-suk had been dragged away in disgrace, Tae-sung stood alone with Makena in his study. The rain had stopped, and the first rays of moonlight streamed through the windows. He told her everything, that he knew she was innocent, that he had investigated her from the start, that he had seen the photo of her with Yuna. And then he confessed the truth he had been holding in his heart for months. "I love you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not because of my wife, not because of my son, because of who you are, the woman who faces every storm with grace." Makena had wept. She had wept for Yuna, for the sister she had lost, for the boy who had suffered, and for the man who had been trapped in a fortress of grief. And then she had wept because she realized that she loved him too. Everything came to a head in Seojin's bedroom, where the little boy had been waiting in anxious silence. When the door opened and Tae-sung entered with Makena at his side, Seojin launched himself at her, clinging to her as if she were the only anchor in a stormy sea. Tae-sung knelt beside them and told his son that Makena would stay forever not as a nanny, but as family, as his mother. Seo Jin's face lit up with a joy so pure that it erased every shadow of the past. He looked at Makena with shining eyes and asked, "Will you be my mom for real?" And Makena, holding back tears of her own, pulled him into an embrace and whispered, "I already am, little one. I already am." In the garden the next day, bathed in the golden light of a new morning, Makena chased Seo Jin through the flowers while Tae-sung watched from the terrace. For the first time in years, he felt something other than cold emptiness. He felt hope. He felt love. And when Makena turned to smile at him, he walked toward her and took her hand. "I found my family," he said softly. "So, did I," she replied. And little Seo Jin, running to join them, grabbed both their hands and looked up with a smile that could rival the sun. "Forever?" he asked. Makena and Tae-sung looked at each other, their hearts beating as one. "Forever," they said together. And in that moment, the mockery and the cruelty and the prejudice all melted away, leaving behind only the unbreakable bond of a family forged from loss, love, and the courage to trust. From Tina's love story, did you love this story? Like, comment, and subscribe. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. See you in the next drama.